This is the Cortex Athletic Review. I'm your host, Evan Carrillo, and each week I dive into the research to distill and relate sports science and psychological peer-reviewed literature to modern-day coaching and athletic development with a slight bias to hockey goaltenders. Episode 21. Let's go to work. A disclaimer to start things off here. This is a very much goalie-centric episode, but the article here explores a useful coaching framework that was recently proposed, and it also dives into the common coach frustration of practicing something over and over and over again with your athletes, but just not really seeing it translate to a game that well. The article this week is titled Structure of the Technical Tactical Training Methodology for Ice Hockey Goaltenders aged 15 to 17 based on action variability under conditions of uncertainty. No one's ever accused any academic researchers of being good and concise with their titles, but that one's a bit of a mouthful especially. This one comes to us from Russia, which again piqued my attention since I'm a guy who has no problem stealing good ideas, and Russia, of course, has a strong track record of producing some of the best goalies in the world. It was written by Nikolay Babiev and colleagues, various PhDs, doctoral candidates, and professors from Lesgaft University in St. Petersburg, Russia. The original article was written in Russian, so I had to translate it to English, and full disclosure there, I used an AI to make the translation for me, so if anyone fluent in Russian reads the original article and notices any slight wording differences, that would be why. As for the type of research, it's a little bit different than my usual stream. This is a theoretical paper where the authors analyzed existing research and development paradigms and then built and proposed a structured training model based on the work that they analyzed. The purpose of the study is to provide theoretical justification for this model that they proposed based on the principle of controlled variability of actions, but under conditions of game uncertainty, aimed at improving the reliability of competitive performance. In other words, offering some validation for this proposed coaching framework model based on taking an uncontrolled environment and trying to manufacture elements of that same uncontrollability into a controlled practice setting. The paper begins with the authors noting the increased speed of the game and traffic around the net, pointing out that a play might start looking like something might happen, but it doesn't take much for something else to happen. They call this high variability, and intuitively, I think we would all agree that the game is quite messy. It's impossible to predict exactly what the scene is going to look like even a couple of seconds into the future. For contrast, the opposite of this variability would be something like executing a gymnastics routine, like, say, on the balance beam. Don't get me wrong, still a super technical and highly difficult skill, but performance here depends more on executing a highly practiced routine in that predictable setting. Early on in the paper, the authors noted a bit of a problem, and this was after they analyzed the modern training programs. That problem, again, which stems from an observation from these Russian researchers, is that most training is quite linear. It's step by step. It's very scaffolded. It's build the technique, repeat it, and automate it. This does carry an assumption that the conditions stay relatively stable. Now, obviously, the game doesn't work like that. It's very much nonlinear and, as said before, very messy. Every pass, interception, rebound, screen, deflection changes the problem that the goalies are facing in real time. So the issue is we may end up training stability for an environment that just never stays stable. Game environments, the authors note, are very much nonlinear. Each subsequent play or bounce or pass or shot changes the initial parameters of the task, which requires quick and ongoing adjustments. This is probably a good time to mention that these are the words of the authors. Again, I'm just repeating this. I'm just as guilty as anyone of repping things out at times, which I would also argue that there is a time and a place for, and that we will also see in the paper that it is very much built in for as well. So, this is not a holier than thou lecture about the proper way to coach. It's just me sharing a new article. Back to it now. The authors suggest this variability of actions we see in gameplay is not really accounted for as much as it could be in the new current coaching theory, which in a way makes sense because of how challenging it can be to control an uncontrollable element of play with the limited resources coaches have available. In a perfect world, and I have seen teams do this really well also, is the days that the goalie coaches are out, the head coach would send them 3 or 4 or 5 shooters, and the goalie coach is able to take an entire zone and manufacture some drills and some plays and some reads. Oftentimes, though, the reality is that the coach is going to send the goaltenders with the goalie coach, maybe an assistant coach or a shooter to go to one end and just do some pretty basic shooting drills. So there are very real challenges to adding in and manufacturing this variability into normal training. What the authors offer here is a pretty simple scaffolded framework that increasingly adds some structured uncertainty. They set it up in the form of these blocks, and these blocks progress from that of stability to one variable changing to multiple variables changing, then increasing the time pressure and forcing quicker decision making. Here's how they laid it out. The first block is all about stability. Predictable, controlled conditions. There's very much a time and a place for these still, with no real shooter options, screens, or deflections. The main goal with goalies at this point is building and compounding a reliable skill-specific base. So hitting the spots positionally, tracking releases, rebound control, good posture, rotations, mobility movement sequences, all that good stuff. Drills in this block would look like a coach or a shooter with a pile of pucks in one spot, maybe a bit of pre-shot movement for the goalie and setting for a well-placed shot. The authors suggest that this is where most of the training actually currently lives. Block 2 starts to introduce some uncertainty, but still very much controlled. Maybe a pass goes to, say, one of 2 stationary shooters, or a shooter has 2 possible routes out of the corner, or a shot itself is going to go high or low, or the shooter can put a shot straight on net, or maybe aim for a stick for a deflection. Could be anything, but the point is that there's not this full-on game chaos. It's having the goalies learn that there's more than one correct response, and you'll just have to choose them really quickly and then execute. The third block starts to get into some more reads and pre-shot anticipation because it layers multiple variables at once. An example of what this might look like, going all the way back to block 1 with a drill progression, might be a stationary shooter in the middle of the ice. Goalie pushes from the post to the top of the crease for a shot that looks really similar each rep. Again, that was for block 1. Progressing that up to block 2 could add a shooter. So now a goalie has to identify where to push first, then position themselves for that proper shooter. One of 2 options. Now that same drill in block 3 now has multiple variables. So now either shooter can pass or shoot once the goalie gets into position, or something like the second shooter drives the net for a deflection option. This can obviously take many forms, adding traffic, deflections, pass options, shot options, low to high plays or high to low, east to west, or any combination of those, rebound options. The point with block 3 is that the goalie isn't just solving one problem anymore. The problem is constantly updating, which in turn requires a new assessment and solution that would satisfice. I see that third block as starting to play into a well-known decision-making model that actually comes from the military, and it's called the OODA loop. That's a topic for another episode, but OODA is an acronym that stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act, and speaks well to this constant updating and adapting in rapidly changing environments. Blocks 1 to 3 add more and more chaos, and block 4 serves to crunch it all together with some time pressure. Similar situations, but now everything just happens faster. So less time for the goalie to orient themselves, observe, decide, and act. In the article, the authors describe game scenarios set up in a way that require instantaneous evaluation of the situation. Something like a one-touch pass in tight from a low bumper on a power play, maybe a high or low deflection, quick change in attack direction, rebound to a streaking F2 with the goalie partially screened, and so on. The big point is the time interval is deliberately reduced, which has the effect of forcing quicker decisions by increasing the load on the goalie's anticipation. So what do we do with all this? I don't think there's anything really surprising with these findings or this proposed framework, but I can appreciate how the authors lay out the different progressions. I'm in total agreement that development is very much nonlinear. So I found it somewhat amusing when the authors argued this early on in the paper, but then go on to propose a 4-step progression that does look pretty linear. I think the difference here is that this framework doesn't attempt to model the game, but rather give some guided structure to the learning environment. Gameplay is very much nonlinear. It's unpredictable, although there are some patterns that do exist. Games are always constantly changing, but training has to be more intelligent than just mirroring that same level of chaos. Development might not be linear, but it's very possible to progressively introduce nonlinearity in a very controlled way. And I can appreciate a block-style framework like the one that the authors proposed here. A little bit shorter, but that does it for this week's episode. The Oilers are currently playing in Game 2 against Anaheim, so I'm going to get this edited and try and catch the last of the game here. These episodes will continue to post every Thursday morning at 6 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. You can listen in wherever you listen to your podcasts, as well as on YouTube at the channel Cortex Goaltender Development. If you would like to support the show, which is currently a one-man operation, you can do so by heading over to patreon.com/Cortex Athletic Review. I hope this episode was interesting and or useful. If you'd like to connect, there are some links in the show notes that you can check out. My name is Evan Carrillo. This is the Cortex Athletic Review. Stay out of your own way.